Welcome to E-commerce with Coffee, a podcast powered by Amber Engine, where we share e-com secrets for brands over your favorite brew. We start with the caffeine and then leap enthusiastically into behind-the-scenes e-com insights that led to the success of our guests. I'm Nate Svoboda, and I'm about to serve you up the best. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's episode of E-commerce with Coffee. In this episode, I get to chat with Osa Gaius. He is the founder and CEO of Parrot, which is a mobile payment platform helping brands to engage with customers in a more personal and convenient way. So we're really going to be talking today about the importance of optimizing for the mobile experience and then how to include SMS overall into your strategy, as well as some tips and tricks for how the smaller brands can stand up to the big guys. So Osa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation. But, before we dive into it, you're a busy guy. I imagine caffeine has got to play some role in your life.
Yeah, it does. It does. I have a coffee, the exact same cup of coffee every morning from a coffee shop like around the block. So definitely how I start my day.
And what is that cup of coffee that you have the exact same way every day?
It's usually an Americano, sometimes with a splash of milk and sugar, but usually just an Americano, straight up.
So Americano, I'm trying to think about how they make all the different kinds of coffee. That's generally a little bit lighter than just straight up, right?
Yep. Yeah. Usually a little lighter, starts with water and then, add in your coffee. It's what I drink. It's not fancy, but definitely gets me going.
Whatever gets the job done, right? I used to try and drink it without any milk or sugar, and I was able to do that for a while. But I just feel like I wasn't enjoying it enough. I was just using it as fuel, and I was losing the enjoyment part. So I went back on that a little bit. But who knows? Maybe we'll switch from time and again. Well, really excited to chat today. Before we dive into the meat of the conversation, can you give us a little bit of background, right? For you personally and professionally, and what led you down this path in e-commerce?
Yeah, no, I think for me, my story starts, before getting into software. I grew up in Nigeria, spent the early part of my life there, came to America, and then studied computer science and worked as a software engineer. And one of the last places I worked at was MailChimp, the email marketing company. And while there, I heard a lot of merchants talking to us about what they thought the future of texting was like, the future of customer communication. And that's where I really got awakened to the fact that, email was starting to phase out, SMS was starting to come in. And when I went back to Nigeria, I had a full circle moment where I saw, consumers interacting with businesses and paying businesses over text. And so that learning for me, humbled me as a Nigerian American, because I realized I had a lot more to learn from Nigeria, Africa, Asia, than I thought, right? And part of that was how to do texting and how to do payments over the next 10 years.
So it's interesting. Talk to us a little bit about the process in Nigeria today. So you just said that that's, the idea of paying through text is already somewhat commonplace. Maybe if you have any insight, why is that more forward in that part of the world than it is here?
Yeah, to be spot on, that's something I had to wrestle with when I came back, because, my initial thought, again, as an American going to a foreign country or going back, right, was, okay, I've got a lot to go teach and not much to learn, right, just to be transparent there. And one experience I had was, I was at a roadside stand buying something or trying to buy something, and my cousin was like, you can just text the merchant the money. And in Nigeria, there's a system similar in Kenya, similar in Asia with WeChat, where you can connect your phone number to your bank account or to your credit card. That way, when you're texting with a merchant, they sort of know who you are, right? They know what credit card you need to provide them with. And what we realized, or what I realized when I came back, was that was a core piece of infrastructure that governments and companies outside America had invested in, because the vast majority of the folks living in these countries don't have laptops. They don't have desktops. They just have their phone. Sometimes they've got two phones, one that's, a typical, Nokia, like a cheap phone, and they've got an iPhone where they can use WhatsApp and other tools like that. And so what we realized was that outside the US, because people didn't have access to computers, they had skipped the desktop revolution. And so whereas in America, we talk about, 50% of traffic is desktop, 50% of traffic is mobile. When you leave the US, it's something like 90, 100% of traffic, in some cases, is mobile. And so these companies and governments have had to figure out how to solve these problems for those populations. And I think for us in America, we're still a little bit behind, given that, folks still tend to have a laptop, a desktop, and a phone.
Yeah, and I imagine that, you being the expert on this topic, how does this type of payment differ from something like Apple Pay, right? I mean, Apple Pay is a little bit different, obviously, but talk to us a little bit about that differentiation.
Yeah, Apple Pay is one of my favorite new developments, especially when you think about what it's done during COVID in terms of being able to walk up to a place and just tap your phone and leave, not have to touch them or bring out your credit card. But I think the primary thing we think about vis-a-vis Apple Pay is Apple Pay makes a ton of sense if I'm on a brand's website and that brand has Apple Pay enabled, right? I can just, Apple Pay to get my thing from their online website. But it's radically different when I'm having a conversation with a brand. So if I'm texting back and forth with a brand or a local business, the question is like, how do I give that business my payment information when I'm not on their website? Because the website is important for Apple Pay because all of Apple Pay's security infrastructure relies on a website. Like that's how Apple Pay does security, is they do a bunch of certificate stuff. And but the short of it is like Apple needs a website to be present for them to guarantee the payment. But the question again is, if I'm just texting that merchant, or I'm texting a local pizza shop, how do I get that pizza shop to authorize payment for me without needing me to go back to the website? And I think that's where a lot of merchants struggle, given that for them the website still is where they need to direct consumers to actually get anything done.
So talk to us a little bit about why a third party like Parrot has to take this on instead of like the telecom providers, right? So why haven't AT&T and Verizon and those companies made a solution to this?
Yeah, that's something I thought about a lot when I got back from Nigeria, because I think for me, when you look at infrastructure in Europe, infrastructure in Africa and Asia, a lot of what we see there is the telecom providers. They have a monopoly similar to Verizon, AT&T, right? They have a monopoly, so they don't have an incentive to innovate, right? Like that's just the reality. Like Verizon doesn't really need to enable, a business in America to collect payments, because Verizon knows that most of their money is going to be made from charging you, the consumer, $50 a month for data or unlimited talk and text, when you and I both know it probably costs them like a fraction of that to actually power your phone service.
What? Seriously?
Yeah. That monopolies get to define their own prices. But I think, for us in the US, what's really happened is because these folks have a monopoly, they have no incentive to innovate, and nor do consumers have a lot of choice. Like I could go from Verizon to AT&T, but it's not like my service is going to be 10x better. It's really just more of the same. And so we think that's one huge reason that the carriers are not innovating to provide something like Parrot. But I think the other question is, why aren't other folks doing this? When you think of the Twilios of the world, or the other folks who could go do this. And again, I think the reality is, for a lot of American businesses, when you're transitioning from email marketing or email-based commerce to SMS-based commerce, the easiest first step is just to send a bunch of discount codes over text. And for that, the carriers don't need to be involved or need to innovate, because they can just take their old infrastructure for texting, resell it to businesses, and those businesses can use that to essentially spray and pray SMS market. And who clicks, clicks, right? Who doesn't click, doesn't click. So I think that's what the carriers are doing, is instead of innovating and trying to figure out what the next 10 years will look like, they're essentially supporting businesses who want to copy their email marketing and just paste that onto SMS.
Yeah, and I know I mentioned this at the beginning, right, that Parrot's a mobile payment platform, but before we really dive into, how do we strategize around SMS, what are some of the regulation considerations, talk to us a little bit about what specifically does Parrot do, how do you operate?
Yeah, so for a small business, right, think of a business making a few $1 million on an e-commerce platform. Let's take an example of a brand that sells beverages, right? They sell really nice beverages, think tonic water. For that business, what they'll come to Parrot and say is, hey, we've got this tonic water and we need Nate to buy this every 2 weeks. So can you text him and collect his credit card so we can process the payment directly over text. So, hey, Nate, do you want to buy this water? Yes, I want to buy it. Great. Can we charge your credit card that ends in 4297? Yes. That's it, right? You as a consumer have now transacted with a business by replying yes to a text message. And Parrot handles the hard part of that, right? Collecting your credit card, storing your credit card securely, authorizing future payments without needing you to go back to a website or click on links. We know it's you because Parrot has built the secure technology to do that with just your phone number. And so for a business, the real value of thinking about a solution like Parrot or any other vendor is, okay, do I need to engage this consumer in a low friction way? And then do I need to confirm payment in a low friction way? And for a beverage brand, that's all about maximizing lifetime value and getting more orders. But if you're a fashion and apparel brand, it might be, something different. You might have different SKUs you want to push over text or upsells you want to do. But the core of it really is get the sale to happen in a way that's low friction for the consumer.
Yeah, and talk to us a little bit about the regulation considerations. I'd imagine that there's so much that goes into what can a company do or not do in an inbox. How does this apply to texting?
Yeah, texting is really interesting because, as you mentioned, it's really an old technology, right? It's been around for a really long time. People have had phones, smartphones. I came to America in 2002, but I think the interesting thing that's happened is when you look at the core regulation that affects all texting in America, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or the TCPA, what the TCPA says is if a business wants to text the consumer, they need explicit opt-in, right? So the consumer needs to at some point say, yes, I want this business to text me. And what that means for you as a business is, well, you can't just go buy a bunch of phone numbers or phone leads because no one whose number you bought ever opted in, right? You can't legally text them. And the penalty for actually doing that, of texting someone who did not give you permission, is about $500 per text. So if you texted 10 people and none of them gave you permission, you would have to pay $5,000 just for texting those people. And so there's an extreme cost to doing SMS wrong. So the first thing we tell businesses is, well, from a regulatory perspective, you need opt-in, and that opt-in needs to be clear. Either it's on your website when they bought, they gave you permission to text them, or some other way the consumer really did say, yes, I want this beverage brand to text me. But I think the other question is, well, if I am texting you, when can I text you? The rules generally say between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. That's when you can text people. And how many times you can text someone is not a regulation. So you could text a customer who's opted in every single day, and there wouldn't be any regulatory issues there. But that's where the gray area begins, right? Because regulatory perspective, it's, I got to get opt-in and I need to get that text to you between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. But after that, there are no regulations, right? So that's where businesses get to innovate, but also need to be very careful not to abuse the inbox, because unlike the email inbox where, it's kind of a Wild West, when it comes to the phone inbox, there are some regulations at play. And more importantly, your consumer is going to look at the text as soon as they get it, because it's the same inbox that their mom, their wife, their grandpa text them on. And so if you are going to be there, it's going to be important for you as a brand to be very, very careful to treat it as sacred, and keep in mind that someone will see it. And if they like you as a brand, they'll read it. If they don't like you, they'll be annoyed because you're now texting them, really for no reason.
Yeah, I've never typed the word stop faster in my entire life than when I get, a garbled message of acronyms and, 10% off now, and there's nothing like really valuable or substantive to that.
Spot on. Yeah, and in some cases you can, especially when there is no personalization, like your first name's not even in there. It's like, this text is not even for me, right? And that's the feeling a lot of consumers come away with, is like, I've never bought from you before. You don't even know my name. You're just texting me every day because your click-through rates are low on your email.
So I think you just addressed this a little bit, but diving into it more specifically, what are some things that companies need to do differently with their communication via text than they would via email, or, maybe things that companies are doing via SMS today that, maybe they should kind of stop doing or revisit that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing the companies are maybe doing too much is treating SMS like a sort of like a cheaper, faster email, right? Because a lot of brands we talk to, what they tell us is my email open rates are getting lower, right? I'm somewhere around 10% now. 10% of people I send an email to will actually open the email. So if I send 100 emails today to 100 customers, 10 of them will open the email, and maybe 1 out of 10 will click. Maybe you're getting better click-through rates. Maybe you're getting worse. But if I send the same text message, generally around 80 to 90% of people will see it because it's their phone, right? Like everyone reads all their texts because people are just treating their phone as like an extension of themselves. And maybe half of those people will click, maybe 40%, 30%. And so the opportunity, I think, there for brands who are thinking about this incorrectly is, well, my email open rates are low. I'm going to make my SMS open rates make up for that. So let me take the same email I was going to send on Monday. Let me just delete all the words because SMS has, a smaller form factor. Let me delete all the words, delete all the pictures, just copy paste that from my email tool into my SMS tool. Or God forbid it's the same tool, I'm just going to copy from one screen to another screen. So now, technically, I have an SMS strategy. And what we tell brands is that's a surefire way to annoy people because I don't like your emails in the first place. Why would I like your emails in my phone? I don't like your emails anyway, right? Like I did not open the email for a reason. Using SMS as a way to kind of force me to open it because it looks like a text from my friend is not the right solution. Instead, what we recommend brands do, and we see the best brands doing this, is to take a piece of paper out and think about what text messages you would actually want to send your best customers. And things get a little crazy because you might come up with a weird answer, and this is an answer we come up with when we talk to brands, which is nothing. Like, you may not want to text your customers anything. Like, there may be nothing that you want to tell me. And that's okay, right? As a brand, it's okay to not have something to text me. And I think that's kind of the biggest mistake people make when they start with SMS is thinking that they need to tell the customer something. And instead, we think the right way to do it is to come up with the true message you want to communicate. And one way to kind of hack that is to take a piece of paper out and take your phone out and start texting a fictional customer. You can go into your Shopify or go into your BigCommerce backend and just pull out 1 or 2 customers who you have sold to over the last few years or a few months and say, like, what text do I want to send to Joe who bought last week? And it might just be, hey, Joe, thanks for buying. That's it. Like, there's no coupon code, there's no rebuy link. It's just thanks for buying. We think that's the right way to start SMS. Take a piece of paper out, take your phone out, and write that text message out to 4, 5 customers. And you can even map it out over 30, 90 days, what you want to send them every 30 days. But it's going to be natural for you to collect payments, to ask them to buy, if you really start by thinking of what should their experience be if I was using my phone to text them. And we think when brands start, at the high level in terms of like numbers and click-through rates and open rates, they get led down a path that makes email and SMS look almost the exact same when they are really 2 radically different channels.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because you hear similar feedback about people when you're trying to write emails or anything, right? Just see what it would look like on a phone. Pull it out on your phone because, if someone has to scroll multiple times, they're probably not going to finish reading it. So talk to me a little bit about the different skill sets that it sounds like are required for email marketing versus SMS marketing, et cetera. Would you generally see that it's the head of marketing handling all of this? Are there specific skill sets companies should be looking for in individuals? Because, like you said, it's not necessarily a new technology, but it sounds like a new ideology almost.
Yeah, it is a new, it's a radically new way of thinking. I think for a lot of brands, it's maybe similar to Facebook versus TikTok, right? Instagram can kind of be in between, right? You could think of Instagram as the in between for both. But when you think about the differences between the kinds of things you do on Facebook and the kinds of content that works, the kind of strategies you have to leverage versus what works on TikTok, it's a radically different, like you can't even think of them the same. Like you could, but you would be doing yourself a disservice. And so when we think about, if I'm a head of marketing at a direct-to-consumer brand, or I'm trying to hire, right, someone to run my SMS program for me. The thing we encourage brands to think about is, again, perform the same exercise, right? Like, go on your phone and think about the text messages you receive that make you happy, that draw you in, right? And whether it's from friends, families, or businesses, like, what are the texts that get you excited? Then start creating your text message strategy, right? Then start talking to potential hires around, okay, if you were an agency and you ran our SMS marketing, how would you do X? How would you do Y? The same applies to vendors when you're picking an SMS platform. Ask them the same question, like, hey, how would you recommend I text my best customers, or my really, really high value customers who spend, the most amount of money with me, my VIPs? And I think what comes out naturally from that is certain people are going to give you thoughts and strategies that you won't even like, right? When you tell a potential hire, hey, you go write copy for one SMS campaign and send it to me, just text it to me. What they send you should be how you determine whether or not to hire them. Would you want your best customers to read the text message that your agency or your SMS platform or your VP of marketing wrote? If you don't, then you as a founder or an owner of an e-commerce brand have to really sit back and say, okay, maybe we shouldn't text people yet. Maybe we should figure out what our voice is. So I think, to your point, it really starts with, what is your voice as a brand, and how does that voice resonate over text? And the right answer might be it doesn't, or the right answer might be it does, but it's actually very judicious. Maybe we only text people once a month or once every 2 weeks, and it's usually requests for feedback or requests for review or a thank you. Maybe it's not a discount code. Maybe it's not even a sale. It's just a hello, right? And so we think, like, that's the right way to think about it, is think about what your right voice is and your right experience over text is, then go look for tools and vendors and people to fill in that. But don't start by trying to find someone who says they'll promise you a 40x ROI for your SMS marketing program, because more than likely what they'll do is make a bunch of discount codes for 50% off and text that to people, and magically your ROI goes up, right? But it's not because people care, it's because your brand is being diluted.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you just touched on, there's really no one size fit all, right? You spend all this time, well, hopefully, you spend all this time and effort building a very specific, tailored brand voice that you want the consumer or the customer to see and to experience, and then you can very easily butcher that, I feel like, in, poor SMS. Now, my understanding is it's not necessarily as easy to tell, like there isn't an open rate for SMS like there is for email. Obviously you could track opt-outs, you could make a specific text-only coupon code and see how many of those get used. But how do you advise, or how have you seen brands actually track or see metrics on an SMS campaign?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on something that we don't talk a lot about at Parrot, because we think, to your point, it's mostly nonsense. But that's the open rate number. A lot of e-commerce companies, we don't do this as much. We make an effort to, tackle this a little bit, right? But what a lot of SMS marketing folks, whether it's vendors or agencies, will tell you is, again, like I mentioned earlier, your email has a 10% open rate, your SMS has a 90% open rate. But as you mentioned, there is no way to legally track how many people open an SMS, right? So when you text your mom with an iPhone in America, you can have read receipts turned on, right? But I can't turn on your read receipts. You have to turn on your phone, right? Because when you turn on, that tells Apple, hey, it's okay to tell this other person who's texting me when I've read. Email is the same way, right? I can turn on read receipts for email so that people can know when I've read their email. But in the case of SMS, there is no way to do that, right? When a business texts me as a consumer, there is no way, unless the business is using a physical iPhone and I have read receipts turned on, for the business to know that I texted them. Doing so would actually be a massive invasion of privacy. Like, it would be world ending if somehow someone invented such technology. So how do we actually talk about open rates when it comes to SMS? The way we talk about open rates with SMS is, we have some studies we've done, not Parrot, but the industry has done a bunch of studies. The phone carriers have done these, marketing companies have done these, where they'll sit 1,000 people down in a room. This is like old school style, and we'll track if everyone gets a text message, how long does it take them to open the text message? Like in a room, like watching them, like kind of think of an old psychology experiment. And so this is what we've done as right? So we've done this for the last 10 years. We've done these case studies where we put people in a room and we make them get a text and we'll see how long it takes them to check. And what we found generally is that most human beings, right, whether it's in America or elsewhere in the world, tend to look at their phones 4 to 5 minutes a day. I mean, every 4 to 5 minutes, because they're addicted to their phones. And so 90% of the time when they get a text, they'll read it within the first 5 minutes. But I think the right way to think about that is it's not because your business has really, really good text messages that human beings are opening them. It's because human beings are addicted to their phones, right? So it's not because your SMS messages are so radically innovative or compelling that you're getting high open rates. In fact, you can't even track those open rates because you don't have those human beings in front of you to see when they open. And so we think that's a big mistake. Brands kind of lean on that. I'm going to get 90% open rates, so let me send more text. But I think the right way to think about it is 90% of people are going to see this message because they're addicted to their phones, just like me. Do I want them to see this message, right? And I think that mental model is much better for you as a brand than thinking, well, my open rates are going to be high, so by transitive property, my click-through rates are going to be high. Those things don't follow each other, right? Your open rates might be really high on SMS, but your click-through rates might be abysmal, and your unsubscribe rate might be extremely high. So in that case, your open rates are high because people love their phones, but people are actually replying stop a lot, and they're not clicking on the things you send them. And so you can kind of think of that as an anti-goal, right? But I think a lot of brands don't understand that anti-goal, and by just stumbling around in the dark, they end up in that situation where their unsubscribe rates are high, no one's actually responding to their text messages or clicking their links, and their first response to OSA is always, well, OSA, I thought my open rates were supposed to be higher. And it's like, yeah, they are higher, but that's not because your brand is cool, it's just because people love their phones. And the question is, like, if people love their phones and they're going to look at it every 5 minutes, how do you make sure that when they do look at their phone, whatever they see from your brand makes them happy, excited, and want to buy more?
I love that. Personal question. Are you a read receipts guy? Do you have yours on?
No, I do not. Mostly because I don't want anyone in my life to expect me to respond to a text message as soon as I see it or get it. And second, I am worried. I am worried that in America, the phone carriers will at some point turn on read receipts for businesses, which they could. It's technically possible. They've turned it on for Apple, right? They could turn it on for Google, and they can turn it on for even companies like Parrot in the future. My worry is if a business can tell when I read a text message, and they can text me and be like, "You read our text message, you didn't respond to us. Do you hate us?" I don't think that's good for me as a consumer, and so yeah, I have my read receipts off. But I tend to, similar to kind of post iOS Armageddon, I tend to avoid giving more data about myself than I need to actually give.
I think you just made a great pitch for a Black Mirror episode if you've ever watched that show.
Yes, great pitch. That's
well, so there's really two more primary things I want to ask you about. And first one being, some of our listeners come from smaller brands, right? And I think that what smaller brands can lack in resource, they have a benefit of more agility, right? They're able to move faster and respond to change faster. What would you say are some of the things that maybe smaller to medium-sized brands miss on that they should be capitalizing on in order to be able to better compete with those more established companies?
Yeah, this is something I think a lot about, because again, if you go back to my experience in Nigeria, right? One of the powerful things about how small businesses work outside America, particularly in Africa, is it's expected that when you go to a local market, right, and you buy some tomatoes or you buy some cloth, you are supposed to have a relationship with the merchant, right? If it's a woman who runs a roadside stand, when you go to her, you're having a conversation. And if you're outside of America, you're probably haggling, right? You're talking about her kids, and she's talking about your kids, right? There's always a conversation. And I think here in the U.S., we've become kind of impersonal when it comes to business. And so I think a lot of small businesses hurt themselves by trying to tap into that, just we're a business, we sell, we market, but ultimately, when a customer chooses to buy from you instead of going to Amazon.com, which is what most people do, if they're in America, or when they choose to buy from you instead of Target, or they choose to buy from you instead of Walmart, it's because they care about you and your business. They care about supporting your small business. And so it's very important that you as a business remember that when you text them or you email them, it's really you they're buying from. They're not buying from your company. They're not really buying your product because it's better or cheaper. It's probably more expensive and less good than if they were to go buy the same product from Amazon or somewhere that has free returns. So take advantage of that relationship, right? As you mentioned earlier, like, don't be afraid to pick up your personal phone, go on your Shopify backend, find their number and say, thank you for buying from me. This is my personal number. If you need something, let me know. That might seem really unscalable, right? To borrow YC's famous, quip, like, do things that are not scalable. If you got 10, 100 customers, you can do that. If you got 1,000 customers, you might need help to do that, right? You might need some software to do that. But if you got 10, 20 customers and they're buying from you and they've already bought from you or they keep buying, build a relationship with them. Send them an email that's from your personal email address. Send them a text message from your phone or from some tool that helps you. Heck, if it's Google Voice, we'll get a Google Voice number. Like, figure it out, right? But it's not about scaling and trying to beat Amazon by being, more automated or more scalable. It's about trying to figure out, why does this customer care enough to buy from me instead of buying from other people? And then how do I thank them for that and provide additional value? And that value might be more products from me. It might be more products from other vendors I know who are similar. Think of cross-selling, right? That old concept. But it really comes down to, like, how do I as a small business compete? And our core belief at Parrot is that the best way to compete is by building a better relationship, not by trying to do the Amazon or Walmart thing of just, lower prices as quickly as possible.
I love that. Well, obviously Parrot, I think, is one that you would give. But, for our listeners, if any of them say, you know what, man, we really need to start thinking about SMS and how we can fit that into our business strategy. Are there any tools that you like and are, I know you're probably not going to get any commission on this, but, anything that people could go Google and check out quickly?
Yeah, one of my favorite tools is a tool called Attentive, Attentive, Attentive.com. They're sort of like one of the gold standards for doing SMS, if you're doing SMS as an e-commerce brand. So we highly recommend them as just something to go look at, get a demo, try to get some information. And the second is community.com. It's the SMS platform that Obama and a bunch of other celebrities use. And it's really great at that conversational part, right? Like, hey, thank you, right? Thank you for buying. Like, that kind of personal interaction that brands need to be doing. It's less focused on, like, the bells and whistles of automating stuff or collecting payments, but it's really good at, I've got a customer, I've got their number, I need to send them a thank you message real quick to say thank you for buying.
I love that. And we will definitely make sure to put those as well as Parrot in the show notes. But, Osa, where can our listeners get in touch with you if, they want to engage with Parrot or, they want to geek out with you about SMS strategy?
Yeah, we run a pretty healthy blog at getparrot.com. It's getparrot.com. So if you want to learn more about SMS, the regulations, we've got a great blog with a bunch of resources on there to learn. And then if you want to get in touch and learn more about Parrot, there's a way for you to fill out your information on getparrot.com, or you can just send me a personal note. I'm Osa at getparrot.com as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for all the time that you've shared. And I personally have learned a lot, so I'm sure everyone else has. But hopefully we can have you on for another conversation in the future.
Thank you for having us on today, Nate. It's been great.
Thanks, Osa. That's it for this episode of E-Commerce with Coffee, powered by Amber Engine. If you haven't gotten your fix yet, be sure to get more e-commerce brand secrets on our website at amberengine.com. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.